Okay. Thank you for being here. And so I just have a standardized list that we're asking everybody so that we get fairness, and it's all the same thing. So I'm just going to run through them.
Like that?
What is the first thing that you would tackle after you're sworn in as governor?
The first thing I would tackle is our education crisis that we're in. I think the very first appointment I would make is a new deputy superintendent of public instruction. And I would be very clear to the public when I make that announcement that I'm establishing a whole new vision for education in Oregon. We are, as you know, 46th in the country, 47th in graduation rate. It couldn't be worse. Well, I guess it could be just a hair worse. But we need to completely refocus education away from what I call sort of an ideological, a partisan push back to academics, back to real core academics, so that we can we can establish our standards and then begin to raise them and get our kids back. My goal, actually, before I leave office would be to go from 46th and 47th to at least that top half in the country. And that would be a big undertaking, but I think we can do it. I think we waste so much time in the classroom on things other than academics that with the right deputy superintendent in place, the right vision put in place, and pushing that down through the Department of Education, down to the individual school level, we could make progress very quickly.
When you talk about wasted time, what are they talking about instead of academics?
Partisan issues, social issues, they're talking about gender, they're talking about politics, they're talking about all sorts of things other than really focused. As you probably are well aware, they're looking now at talking to kindergartners to third grade about gender identification. I know when my kids were in kindergarten, they were more worried about which apple group they were going to be, the Galas or the Golden Delicious. And the focus has to go back to academics. It's a matter of the limited hours in the day to teach these kids. They need to be learning reading, math, science, history, the basics. And we need to be focusing hard on that and raising, well, at this point, the standards have been removed. We need to get standards back in place, and then we need to have higher expectations for our kids. They can do this.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So in the greater Portland area and around the state, homelessness is a big problem. How would you, as governor, address the homeless crisis?
No, that's near and dear to my heart. As you may know, I am 40 years in recovery from alcoholism. So I have sort of unique expertise and experience in this area. I've been on the board of the DePaul Treatment Center for years. And so I know sort of at the core of my being that what we're doing on the streets all over Oregon is absolutely backwards. It isn't compassionate. There's nothing compassionate about what we're doing. We're allowing these people to commit slow suicide on our streets. And we're enabling them. And so the problem keeps getting worse because the more you enable, I train horses on the side and they say, if you want to get something accomplished, you have to make the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult. And what we're doing is we're making the wrong thing so easy and the right thing is very difficult. Because here in Oregon, we are #1 in the country in substance abuse per capita. But after all the billions of dollars we've spent on the so-called homeless problem, we are number 50 in treatment beds per capita in the country. Number 50, we are the worst. So there are no opportunities for these people to get off the street and get clean and sober. We're enabling them. So first off, create a database so that we can legally remove these people from the streets, which I would do immediately. In order to do that, we'd have to create some fairly large-scale low barrier shelter facilities around the state. I would do that. And then begin to quickly add treatment beds all over the state by reallocating all this funding that's been going to all these so-called housing alternatives and options. Anyone in the state, and almost every family in the state, who's had any experience with someone they know, or in their family that's had a substance abuse problem, they know the last thing in the world you would do is give that person the keys to a house. The last thing you would do. The problem is not housing. The problem is substance abuse, addiction. And it has to be, you have to put a hard stop in front of people with a substance abuse problem. Now, we also have some issues with the mentally ill, and that goes kind of into the healthcare problem. But again, no treatment beds for people in this state at this point to speak of. Certainly nowhere near enough. In fact, as I've traveled the state, I've talked to a lot of the sheriffs around the state, and they all say, and they say it kind of tongue in cheek, but they don't think it's funny, that what you call treatment for the mentally ill in Oregon, you call it jail. And that is wrong, and it has to be changed.
So on the issue of if people had places to go and decided they did not want to leave the streets, you would be okay with forcibly removing them?
Absolutely, I would, and there would, in order to do that legally, of course, you have to have a shelter bed available. If they choose not to go to a shelter bed, they should still be forcibly removed from the streets. You have to put a hard stop to this problem. Enabling it, and I know this as someone who went through addiction and came out the other side, I wouldn't be here today, I wouldn't be sitting in front of you if someone, many people actually, hadn't put a hard stop in front of me. And then there had to be an alternative. There had to be a treatment bed. This is the sad part. These billions of dollars we've wasted on what I call the homeless industrial complex, government job after government job, and nonprofits being created and funded by taxpayer grants and private giving. It's this churn, and we are making the problem worse. And every single one of those people, if you think about it, has a reverse incentive to solve the problem. You have to put an incentive in front of the person that has a substance abuse problem and say, look, you're off the street, you have two options. You can go into the shelter, you can go into treatment, but you cannot stay here, period. End of story.
And you mentioned at the very beginning creating a database. What is that? I mean, I know what a database is, but you're saying get the names of the individuals who are on the street and make sure that...
Oh, no, it's the other way around. In order to follow the decision that came out of the Ninth Circuit, the Martin decision, you have to, in order for law enforcement to remove people from the street, you must show that there is at least a shelter space available for them. They don't have to go to it, mind you, but there has to be one. Now, I give you the example. This is a great example. A friend of mine said that her husband was looking for a particular bottle of whiskey and called his local liquor store, OLCC liquor store. The OLCC can tell you where that bottle, that particular brand of liquor is in every store in the state, in what shelf it's on, and how many there are. Well, if they can do that for a bottle of liquor, they ought to be able to create a database. This is simple inventory control. So we will do this. Other states do this. You have to think, why haven't we done this? I think there's a very pointed reason we haven't. I mean, it's sad to say, but you almost begin to wonder, is there an incentive not to solve this problem? It's leaking all over the state. And the current elected officials who have utterly failed us, will try to tell you that they can't be solved. Well, other states have solved it. And I, as governor, will. It might take a while, it's very complex, been building for 30 years, but it can be done.
Okay. One question we're also asking involves the last presidential election. Do you believe that the election was stolen from President Trump?
I don't know, and neither do you, and neither does anyone out there. And that is why we're in the state that we're in right now in this country, where people are just at each other's throats. We are in a situation where people literally don't know the answer to that. And that can't continue. People have to begin to and I will try everything in my power to help rebuild confidence in our voting system, but we also have to make sure that we rebuild integrity in our voting system at the same time. And I don't think that anyone with a straight face could actually sit here and say that they are sure what the election result would be. For example, we just found out now that the entire Hunter Biden laptop saga that was deplatformed, censored off of social media. One of the leading newspapers in the country was absolutely censored on that story right before the election. And now the New York Times and the mainstream media are saying, oops, we made a mistake. It is accurate, it is true. Well, 6 months too late, and this is why people in the country sit here and ask each other questions like, was the election stolen? How is any voter supposed to know? How would you know? Can you categorically say you know?
Have you heard of the Electoral College?
I know what the vote count was going through. I'm not denying what the vote count is, and I'm not denying who's sitting in the Oval Office. And that's the way it is, and that's the way it's going to be. The question is, how many problems were there? How many shenanigans? And that's why I bring up the Hunter Biden issue, because honestly, that had a huge impact on the race.
All right, thank you for your answer. Okay, big problems around Portland, especially with gun violence.
Yes.
And I know as governor, you're not in charge of Portland Police, but what would you do as governor to stop this cycle of violence that we're in?
You know, I'm running as an outsider. I think you know that. I'm not a politician. I've had no elected office in the past. And that puts me in a unique position that I don't owe anyone anything. So I can do anything. And I have nothing to lose in this race. So it gives me the opportunity to really everything's on the table. There's a lot that I can do that I think some of the other candidates would have a difficult time given, who they're going to owe some things to as they come into office. I come in, nothing to lose. I don't owe anyone anything. So on this issue, I absolutely support law enforcement. I absolutely support prosecuting criminals, both for property crimes and for violent crimes, both. And in the Portland area, we have basically given a carte blanche to people on property crime, which is why it's climbing. And even the gun violence is climbing because there's an attitude in the city from the elected officials now that whatever goes, and it won't be prosecuted. So that will not fly when I'm governor. I mean, I will put a stop to that on a vision basis, on a bully pulpit basis. I will be very aggressive and assertive with going from region to region, visiting with sheriffs and police departments, and making it clear that as your new governor, I support you. I want to see police departments fully funded. I want to see police departments fully staffed, and I'll do what I can to get behind that, and through the budgeting process as well. But I think this is an attitude problem. It's a cultural problem that's sifted down. And I go back to my experience and my expertise on the substance abuse issue. I've visited Southern Oregon 7 times now, I think, where we have major problems with the cartels. Drugs flowing in across the state's southern border at Jackson County, Josephine County. Those sheriffs are under siege, and the residents of those counties are under siege. But those drugs are flowing up the I-5 corridor and into Portland and creating huge drug crime. I think the issues of crime, substance abuse, and homelessness are absolutely intertwined, and they are the most substantial threat to our safety and our children's safety. I haven't mentioned it, but it's very important. One of the things I would do as quickly as possible is refer to the people ballot measure 110 that decriminalized hard drugs. Again, police departments, sheriff's departments, parents groups, and the treatment community are all of a mind that this must be reversed, or our state is doomed, because it is this substance abuse problem, the fentanyl that's coming in, the methamphetamine that's ruining our communities. That is what's underlying all this gun violence and criminal violence. I mean, it's not all of it, but it's 90% of it. And those communities agree that those problems are intertwined, and until we get that referred and repealed, we're in big trouble in Oregon. Now, I would, as governor, lead the charge, marshal those forces, and then get that ballot measure, the piece that decriminalized the drugs. I would get that referred to the people. We must overturn that to get our crime down.
Okay. Sorry to look at my watch. I just want to make sure that we're
I'm a yacker.
that we respect your time and Bob Tiernan's time as well. What about this? The legislature and the state has become, it seems, more divisive in recent years. When you're governor, how would you bring the legislature and the state together so everyone can work towards our common goals?
The legislature and the state, you mean like the rural, urban, the division that we see there?
Yes.
Well, again, the fact that I'm coming in as an outsider and I haven't been engaged in partisan politics, I think is going to be a real important factor there. I think when people see me as governor, they're going to realize that I am very focused on what I will call kitchen table issues, our education problems, our high prices that we're facing right now. I mean, these are really hurting working families. The crime rate, and this is something that is not a partisan issue. This affects everybody. You can be a Democrat or a Republican or a non-affiliate. So as the outsider candidate without this partisan baggage, I'm uniquely situated then come into office and stay focused on those issues. And I plan to. I have no particular interest in bickering about the ideological battles, and I am not looking for a career in politics, so I won't be concerned about, trying to do favors for this person or that person so I can keep. I really am only running to get these problems solved. I think we all know that we've been on a 40-year decline, and it's time for a hard stop. It's time for a hard reset and to start moving the state back up in a positive direction. I think that the legislature on both sides of the aisle is going to recognize that have no interest in talking about ideological battles. I am looking to solve problems for regular Oregonians.
Okay. Thank you. We've covered a lot. Okay, final question then. Two final questions.
Okay.
One, you sort of covered this in the very beginning, but graduation rates in Oregon are relatively low compared to the rest of the country. What would you do to help with that?
Well, the graduation rates are not relatively low. They're in the tank. They're just down at the bottom. And it has to be addressed immediately. So again, I think there's the refocus on academics is what has to happen. And going down, from kindergarten forward, I hear from parents and I hear from teachers, and I've heard it from principals, I've heard it from superintendents. Far too much time is being spent with teachers in training sessions, et cetera, and in the classroom on non-academic work. So my goal, my vision for our schools is going to be a very strong refocusing on core academics. And until our students are excelling at those core academics, I will keep the pressure on. It's going to be foot on the gas on core academics, and let's take the foot off the gas on anything extraneous at all. And it's not to single out any particular thing. The point is we've not focused enough on those core academics to get our kids where they're performing at a high standards rate. And this is across the board. Students of every color are not measuring up. If you're 47th in the country in graduation rate, it's not just one group of people that's missing out. It's just across the board.
Okay.
I think some of our rural schools, in fact, have a lot of trouble.
Final question. Climate change, climate issues affecting Oregon, a lot of areas, wildfires, et cetera. What would you bring to the table that would help Oregon cope with the changing climate?
All of a sudden the question went south. So I'm deeply concerned about the wildfire situation, and I've been a long-term spokesperson for rural and blue-collar Oregon from the metro area through the work I've done in writing and publishing. That being said, so what would I do? Well, I believe that what we have done so far has been more in the nature of virtue signaling and not actually accomplishing anything from the standpoint of what Oregon is adding to CO2. The only time we add CO2 to the atmosphere is when we have wildfires. And so I think our forest policy needs to be, I mean, not the only time, but we add a lot of CO2 to the atmosphere through our wildfires. millions of tons of CO2 get up into the atmosphere through that. So we have to make some major revisions to how we handle wildfires, how we handle our state forest policy, and also I'm very concerned about our post-burn policies in that our state is, if you travel the state, you'll see it's in terrible condition where the fires have not been treated post-burn. But beyond that, on the climate change issue itself, again, I think we have to approach this from a much more scientific and economic perspective, and any further work that we do, because as I said, I think the benefits have been negligible, and the taxes levied and the costs levied out to regular Oregonians has been huge with minimal benefits. Going forward, I will have every policy looked at from a scientific point and from a cost-benefit analysis, because we're not accomplishing anything with what we've done so far except to tax Oregon families.
Okay, thank you very much.